Cassian Ward was 42, a name on buildings and indexes, a face on magazine covers that praised his discipline as if it were a miracle instead of a habit that made him lonely. He had traded late-night ramen with friends for calendars so tight the minutes couldn't breathe. Two divorces behind him, a board to the left, a skyline below, and one thought he could not file away like an email. Legacy, not a wing of a hospital or a university chair with his initials in brass. A child. Someone to outlast the titanium and glass he'd arranged into a life. He didn't want to love again. Love to him was a negotiation you always lost. But a child felt different, an investment that outlived you, a line that continued. He wanted it clean, clinical, a transaction. He wanted control. That afternoon the river looked like cut metal under the Manhattan Bridge, and Cassian's car idled while a light held him prisoner on Delancey. On the sidewalk ahead, a woman in an army green jacket crouched over the pavement, sketching on the back of a flattened delivery box. A stub of charcoal stained her fingers. Her hair was a dark storm she hadn't found a comb for, her cheeks wind-chapped and stubborn. People walked around her as if she were a trash bag they didn't want to trip on, but she drew like the world was quiet, like the river held its breath to watch. He turned the wheel away when the light changed, then circled the block and came back, cursing his own curiosity. "You," he called from the open window, the vowels precise the way rich men's vowels always are. "Come here." She didn't move. She lifted her chin instead, eyes bright blue with red rims. A street cat glare that said she had been told to move along enough for 2 lifetimes. "If you're here to tell me the sidewalk isn't mine, you're late," she said, voice even. "I have a proposition." He heard the clipped boardroom quality in his tone and hated it even as he used it to protect himself. "Not what you're thinking." "Get in the car. I'll take you somewhere to talk." "I don't get in cars," she replied. "People like me don't get out again." He could have driven away. He could have forgotten the way the charcoal had moved over the cardboard. Strong lines, no sketchy indecision. Instead he parked, stepped onto the curb, and stood far enough away to make the choice hers. "There's a cafe around the corner," he said, "a public place. 10 minutes. If you hate what I say, you walk out and I don't follow. In the end, hunger negotiates where pride cannot." She gathered her drawings like they were small, frightened animals, slid them into her backpack, and walked with him while the wind stitched itself through her jacket. Inside the cafe, he bought her soup and coffee and watched her guard lower by millimeters with every spoonful. When she finished, he laced his fingers together on the table and said, "My name is Cassian. I want you to carry a child for me. I'll make sure you're safe, comfortable, and independently represented. When the child is born, I'll take full custody. You'll be free, with more money than you've had in a long time." She laughed, one short sound that wasn't amused. "You're out of your mind." "Maybe." He didn't blink. "But I'm also thorough. You will have your own attorney, your own therapist, a doctor you choose from a list of top specialists. You will live somewhere warm and clean. No one will own you. This is a contract, not a collar." "Why me?" she asked. "Because you were drawing on a freezing day like the world wouldn't exist if you didn't put it on a page. Because you look like someone who's been ignored so long, she doesn't expect anyone to be fair. I can be fair." "Fair?" She tilted her head. "I sleep under a bridge." "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," she said after a long pause. "Maya Reyes." "Maya," he replied, testing it softly, a sound that almost warmed. "If you walk out, I won't stop you. But I don't think you will. Because you know what cold tastes like. You know what it means to have nobody to call. I'm offering walls and heat, doctors who call you by your name, and when it's done, money in an account with only your name on it." She stared at the steam rising off her coffee, the ghost of warmth she could hold but not keep. "And the child?" "Mine," he said, and there was the cold again, polished, professional. "No strings to you after birth. That's the only way I know how to do this, I'll be honest. As a narrator and a watcher of people, I wanted to hate him there. You probably do too. Drop River in the comments if you're still with me." I laughed at his neatness in the face of something as messy as life. But I've learned not to end stories at chapter 1. People surprise you when you look long enough. Maya asked for 24 hours. He gave her exactly that and nothing more. He returned to an apartment whose windows were so clean the city looked like it had been newly printed, and called 3 attorneys, 2 doctors, and 1 therapist who had a waiting list for almost everyone except him. He paced while legal language ironed the wrinkles out of his fear. When the intercom snapped to life the next evening and the doorman said, "Miss Reyes," his body answered before his mouth did. "Send her up." She came carrying everything she owned in a thrifted backpack and a grocery bag. She set the bag down, squared herself, and said, "I will do it. With my own lawyer. With my own therapist. And one more thing. Nobody calls me the homeless one. I've had a name my whole life." "Agreed," he said. He showed her a document whose language had been combed for traps and still carried the smell of them. He watched her eyes move over the paragraphs, watched her flinch at certain phrases, relinquishment, custody, no claim, and then watched her straighten. Maya signed her name with a stroke that was neither timid nor dramatic, a mark like a doorway. They did not go to his penthouse that night. She didn't want the elevator that smelled like money or the hallways that could curl her into nothing. Instead, he had already rented a townhouse in a quiet street near the park, a place with wide stairs and a banister polished by other people's hands. It had white sheets on the bed and a vase of daffodils that looked too cheerful to be real. An intake nurse visited with brochures and blood draw kits, and a smile that reached her eyes. A therapist sat on the other side of a small oak table and asked Maya questions gently enough that they sounded like offerings. An attorney with braids and a steel voice read the contract out loud and crossed out 3 sentences she didn't like until Cassian nodded and had the changes initialed. Only then did Maya exhale. Only then did Cassian sit in the foyer for a minute after she went upstairs, elbows on knees, the posture of a man who had chosen to build a bridge over a canyon and was only just appreciating its height. He didn't move into the townhouse. She didn't move into his penthouse. He visited in the afternoons with a bag of groceries he didn't know how to carry. Some days she wouldn't talk. Some days she talked too much because silence builds up like fog and needs wind to break it apart. He brought a sketchbook once, expensive enough to make her hands hesitate. "For when you can't sleep," he said, "or when you can't not draw." "You remembered," she murmured. "I'm good at remembering," he said. "It's what people like me get praised for when we're very young. We remember how to obey the rules that let us win." "Maybe you forgot a few important ones," she said, but not cruelly. The medical plan, like all Cassian's plans, was complete. He didn't say the words out loud, but they hung above every appointment. Control. The embryo would be his genetic child. The medicine would be timed. The doctor, a woman who had delivered children for rock stars and senators, would call him with updates and call Maya by her name. When Maya asked if she could choose music during procedures, the doctor smiled and said, "Bring your playlist." A week after the embryo transfer, they sat at opposite ends of the same couch, pretending to watch a nature documentary. The screen showed a river cut open by rain. Maya kept a hand on her abdomen, as if a stranger might stumble there and need a guide. Cassian watched her without knowing he was doing it. "I don't pray," he said, surprising himself, "but I would for this." "You don't have to pray for the river to find the sea," she said quietly. "It doesn't ask permission." When the first ultrasound bloomed sound into the room, a small metronome that made the nurse's eyes shine, Maya pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling as if she could anchor herself there. Cassian stood straighter than he had to, the kind of posture you learn when you think every room is a stage. The doctor said, "So far, so good." And they both pretended the words didn't make their throats tight. That's the moment I caught myself rooting for them, against my own cynicism, against what Chapter 1 led us to believe. I still wanted to hold him accountable for leading with money. I still wanted to protect her from anything with fine print. But I also recognized the look that crossed his face when he heard that sound. It's the most expensive thing any of us get for free. Awe. Night after night, Maya drew in the quiet townhouse. Women with wind for hair, stairways that led to fields, a baby whose hands were too small to hold the moon, but tried anyway. She taped one drawing to the wall above the chair where she napped, a city with more trees than budgets usually allow. In the mornings, she walked the park until ankle-high dogs recognized her and tugged their owners toward her knees. She would have said no if you'd asked whether she was happy, but she was warmer. She was fed. She was seen on purpose. That's not nothing. Cassian watched her change, slowly, the way neighborhoods do. He never called her brave because people say that when they want to look generous. He never said he was grateful because gratitude felt like an admission that he owed. But he brought soup when the nausea hit hard and learned which crackers didn't crumble to sawdust in her mouth. He installed a dimmer so the hallway light wouldn't punch her eyes on bad days. He learned that care is a verb with small gears. If you've ever been wrong about someone in chapter 1 and then wrong again in chapter 2, you know how it feels to stand inside your old certainty and feel the walls quietly move? That's where he was. That's where she was. And the river kept going. The second trimester loosened its fist and let Maya breathe. The townhouse learned her footsteps the way a dog learns its person. Cassian stopped hovering like an intern trying not to be noticed and started appearing like a man who didn't want to miss things. Not the big events, the small ones. The afternoon she could finally stomach strawberries. The evening the radiator sang exactly the note she'd drawn yesterday. The day an old woman on a park bench asked how far along she was and Maya said 21 weeks, without flinching at how attached the sentence sounded. He was present at appointments, back against the wall, like a bouncer at the door to a club he didn't own, which made the nurses smile at how protectiveness chooses weird disguises. He kept his comments short but his attention long. He never took a call when the doctor came in. "You can step out," she told him once kindly, because some men are fragile in rooms where women wear paper gowns. "I'll be staying," he replied, and his voice had no tremor. If you want to know when I forgave him a little, it was then. Maya's therapist asked the questions the contract could not. "What do you want after?" she said, and Maya's throat made an old sound, rusted around the edges. "To not be cold," Maya said. "To not be hungry and pretend I'm on a diet. To paint somewhere I'm not trespassing. Any thoughts about the child?" the therapist asked, soft, unflinching. Maya swallowed and looked at the window, where threads of winter rain were stitching the glass together. "Thoughts are easy," she said. "This," and she placed a palm on her stomach, a small boat rocking, "isn't." The ultrasound that changed everything wasn't dramatic. No violins, no storm. The screen floated in a gray ocean, and the doctor angled the transducer, a practiced choreography, and said, "Oh," in a tone so ordinary, you almost missed the wonder in it. "There are 2 heartbeats." Maya laughed first, a wobbly laugh that surprised itself. "Twins," she said, and the word felt too big for her mouth, like a song you love before you learn the verses. Cassian didn't speak for a long breath. His hands went to the back of the chair, as if he needed furniture to hold him up. When he did find words, they were small. Two, the doctor confirmed, smiling so bright the room looked less clinical. "Both measurements look good. You'll be tired, but you're already tough." On the ride home, neither of them reached for the radio. Noise would have been a lie. The townhouse felt suddenly too quiet, then exactly right. Cassian stood in the doorway to the extra bedroom. Until that afternoon, it had been a plan drawn by a designer who specialized in nurseries that looked like they belonged to palace catalogs, and saw it for what it would be. 2 places to hold sleep, 2 places for crying and breath and firsts. Something trembled in him that money doesn't know how to steady. "Names?" he asked, and the word was naive and enormous and human. "Too soon," Maya said, palm covering an invisible future, like she could hug it from the outside. "But I have a feeling." He handed her an envelope the next day, the nice paper people use when they've been taught how to send gratitude in expensive wrappers. Inside, a letter with 3 lines. "Independent trust established. Your name only. No obligation to me. Use it when you choose, for what you choose." She stared at it until the letters blurred. "Why?" she asked. "Because I can do one thing without controlling it," he said, and that was the closest he had come to confession since the day he learned his first corporate victory felt like a table with an extra place setting and nobody to fill it. Maya's past didn't arrive all at once. It dripped into the room in the places silence left. A mother who worked nights at a laundromat that swallowed her tendons. A stepfather who memorized new rules every month about how little it took to be a problem. A scholarship to an art school she didn't finish because a flu turned into a hospital bill. A couch that became a floor that became a train, that became a bench under a bridge where she learned to sleep with her backpack wrapped around her chest like armor. I don't need pity, she said one evening, holding a mug against her sternum like heat could fix structure. I need time. Time I can give, he said. And then he sat in a chair and said nothing else because sometimes the rich can solve exactly one thing, and silence is the only honest currency for the rest. If you're still with me, comment lantern so I know you're the kind who listens past the headlines. It matters for stories like this because the twist coming is not the tabloid kind. It's the human kind. Late winter brought a scare that rearranged them. A cramp that wasn't the usual, a rush to the hospital that turned corridors into rivers, nurses like boats that knew this water. The monitor relaxed a little while later, and so did the doctor's mouth. And Maya learned the word Braxton Hicks, which sounds friendly enough to be a neighbor and is really the body practicing for something you can't practice your way out of. Cassian stayed in the chair by the bed and watched her breathe her way back from panic. I'm not going anywhere, he told the nurse when she said he could come back in the morning. Neither am I, Maya said, bravado cracked with relief. They started childbirth classes because the doctor said knowledge is a life raft. He learned how to hold a lower back and mean it. He learned the words counter pressure and oxygen saturation, and that ice chips can be a love language. He learned to hear a hitch in Maya's sentence and finish the grocery list without asking if it was okay. Don't romanticize him. He still double-checked the security cameras before bed and reorganized the diapers by size because control is a habit that doesn't quit easily. But he also stopped asking the universe to behave. At night when she slept, he walked into the small room with cribs in duplicate and sat on the floor and read sections of The Wind in the Willows out loud like someone rehearsing for an audience that wasn't here yet. He was not sentimental. And yet, when he reached, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats, he laughed at himself because he had never learned to mess about in anything. Maybe the twins would. Spring stood on the townhouse stoop with a warm palm, and the city unbuttoned a little. Maya drew in the park and traded nods with the saxophonist near the fountain. One afternoon, she sketched a girl with two braids and a boy with a cowlick that refused to be tamed and taped it above the dresser. You've decided? Cassian asked. I've imagined, she replied. That's different and also the same. He told her a story. Then he hadn't told anyone whose name he didn't pay. A teenage Cassian sitting on tile outside an ICU, while a monitor inside his mother's room ticked and scolded. A doctor explaining in clean words about a genetic quirk in their family, a white streak of hair that appeared like a river's foam above the right temple in one baby every generation. His mother's streak had shown at 6 months. His grandfather's in the frame photograph, everyone pretended wasn't the altar. No one knew if he'd carry it forward. He didn't. Maybe it ends with me, he said, tone flat, a dare to fate. And maybe it doesn't, Maya said, not as a wish, but as a way to set down a story without breaking it. The day before her due date, the townhouse smelled like lemon and something new. The crib sheets were washed a second time because he didn't trust detergent companies the way he trusted her laughter. She sat in the rocker and watched the late light turn the wall to a soft fire. I thought you wanted a child the way you wanted a company, she said. I was wrong. I thought I could keep this clean, he admitted. I can't. If you have ever believed you were made of stone and then found out you are a person, you'll recognize what came into his eyes then. He looked like someone who'd let himself be loved by something he couldn't buy. There's a word for that. It's called beginning. Labor arrived without heralds. No cinematic splash, only a slow insistence that became a schedule with no calendar. The townhouse contracted with her. The drive to the hospital felt longer than the map allowed. The elevator doors moved too slowly because time enjoys being rude on days like this. A nurse with a braid and a badge that said A. Morales took Maya's hand and said, We've got you. Cassian stood at the foot of the bed until someone told him gently where his strength would do the most good and placed his hand at the base of Maya's spine. The doctor looked like a general who preferred mercy to victory. I won't dramatize the hours for you. Some pains don't need adjectives. If you've been there, your body remembers. If you haven't, you don't need my metaphors. I will say this. When Maya let loose a sound that could have knocked plaster from old ceilings and he said, "Breathe, I'm here," it wasn't money speaking. It was a man who had learned to stay. The first twin arrived wailing like the world had offended him and then immediately forgiven it. A boy, the doctor said, smiling wide. Healthy, furious in a healthy way. The second came minutes later, a girl who took exactly one beat to decide living was worth the work and then announced herself like her brother hadn't already done it for both of them. The room flooded quiet after, a paradox you don't understand until you've been there. Noise everywhere and silence inside your chest like a bell. They placed the babies on Maya's chest and she laughed through tears that made salt maps down her face. Cassian's hands hovered and then didn't. He anchored a blanket edge as if cloth could keep the world at the right temperature. Then he saw it. You remember the story about his family's mark? The white streak that showed itself like a comet over the right temple in one baby each generation, and then never again until it wanted to. The girl had it, a small bright streak just above her right eye, as neat as if a painter had signed her. It was not pretty, it was not ugly, it was a message. Cassian went very still, the opposite of collapse and somehow close. The doctor thought he was about to faint and reached for a stool. He shook his head. His eyes were wet in a way you don't admit if you were taught walls at 10. "She has it," he said, voice shredded. "My grandmother's mark. My mother's mark. The plan. The one that used a donor because a specialist 8 years prior had told him his swimmers were too tired to cross a puddle. Burned away in a silent second. The truth sat down where the plan had been and didn't apologize. He had used his own genetic material in this process out of a stubborn hope and an expensive second opinion he hadn't told anyone about. He had nearly believed he was preparing himself for disappointment. He had not prepared for this. His child. Not on paper. In a way heir could prove if heir wanted to. In a way a heartbeat had been hinting at for months. Shock, yes, but not the kind that breaks, the kind that builds. He looked at Maya then, not at the streak, at the woman who had carried his beginning and her own redemption at the same time. "Thank you," he said. "And I need you to understand this wasn't the rich man's version of gratitude that sounds like a tip. It was a prayer spoken by someone who didn't pray. It reached her like heat reaches cold hands. They took the babies to be weighed and measured. Small numbers declared miraculous by nurses who had seen enough to know everything and still delighted anyway. When they brought the twins back, one to each of them, Maya said, 'You don't have to pretend you're okay.' 'It's a lot. I'm not pretending,' he said. The streak reflected in his eyes. 'I'm different.' The contract waited in his briefcase like a ghost that hadn't realized the party was over. Hours later, when the baby slept and the room exhaled, he pulled it out, the expensive paper that had made him feel less human and more safe. 'This was how I knew to do this,' he said. 'It was wrong in ways I didn't understand yet.' He tore it, not dramatically, not for the cameras, just enough for the sound to be real. The pieces didn't scream. They sat on the tray like shed skin. 'Cassian,' Maya said, careful, because the floor of a room like this can shift under everyone if you stomp. 'We made an agreement because we had to. We can make a new one because we want to. I won't be erased from my own body story, and I won't be trapped by it either.' 'You won't be erased,' he said, 'and I won't trap you.' He breathed like a runner who just realized finish lines are doors. 'Co-parent with me.' Not because a judge wrote it, because we do. Live where you want. Paint what you want. Be who you are. I will learn to share control like a language I should have learned years ago.' You may think he was proposing romance in a hospital room. He wasn't. Not yet. They were too tired to confuse gratitude with love and love with rescue. What they proposed to each other was respect with a backbone. Weeks blurred. Night and day braided into one long rope. The townhouse became a camp where two commanders negotiated peace with two tiny insurgents who believed sleep was tyranny. There were diapers like snowdrifts and bottles like science experiments and pacifiers that hid under furniture at precisely the least convenient times. Cassian learned to sway without music. Maya learned to trust naps that didn't punish her by ending. He went to a parenting class where no one cared that he had a private elevator. They cared that he could fold a stroller without swearing. She painted at the kitchen table between feeds, canvases small enough to dry before a baby found them. He showed up for night feeds he didn't have to, and then pretended morning was normal for the sake of meetings that were no longer the weather of his life. He answered emails with one hand and held a baby with the other, and learned which one mattered, and it wasn't the email. The board noticed that his edges were less knife, more door. The city noticed nothing and everything at once. One twilight in June, when the river had remembered how to glow, they took the twins to the park. The saxophonist near the fountain switched from Coltrane to something softer when he saw Maya roll the stroller into the light. An old woman reached out a finger to the streak above the girl's temple and gasped like she'd been visited by a memory. "My sister was born with that," she said. "Always said it made her special, even when people stared." "She was right," Maya said. And Cassian looked at her like he had found a thing he had lived his whole life without, and would never live without again. Later that night, with the twins asleep at the same time a rare moon, they sat on the floor and didn't turn on the lamps. "I was cruel to myself for a long time," he said, looking at the ceiling as if truth could stick better if you aimed it high. "I called it discipline and excellence. It was fear. I was cruel to myself too," she said. "I called it surviving." "What do we call it now?" he asked. "Learning," she said. "And maybe family." He didn't reach for her hand. He had learned to ask. "Can I?" he said. "You can," she answered, and he did. And it was the first thing he'd done all day that didn't require instruction. Months later, he would ask something else. In a garden behind the townhouse where Clematis climbed the fence, like it had someplace important to be, and she would answer in her time, not his. But that's another chapter. Today's ends here. If you thought he would buy a child and walk away, you forgot that children don't let you walk in straight lines. If you thought she would disappear after giving birth, you forgot that women like her have been writing themselves back into erased spaces since the first story got told wrong. And if you thought the shock at birth would break them, you forgot that some surprises rebuild you from the marrow out. Now tell me in the comments, what did you think changed Cassian more? The streak over his daughter's eye, or the sound of 2 heartbeats the day he stopped pretending life could be managed like a portfolio? Rate this story from 0 to 10 and drop your city. If you've ever surprised yourself by being softer than you planned, type lantern. I read them, and for the ones who made it to the end, here's my personal take. Power without tenderness is just noise. The moment he learned to hold a bottle at 3 in the morning and mean it, that's when the man with glass walls turned into a father with a door open. That's why I told you this one.